Today we're going to take a look at factoring quadratics using the X method. So we've already discussed finding the greatest common factor. We've already discussed finding the difference of squares. And once those two things are done, we can now look at factoring the trinomial, and we are going to look specifically using the X box method. I also call it slide, divide, and bottoms up, and we will see why here shortly. On question number 1, the first thing that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to identify our A, our B, and our C values. And that's going to be our first step for all of these examples. My A value is a positive 2, my B value is a positive 7, and my C value is a positive 6. Now that I've identified these, I can go through and start factoring. So the first thing that we're going to do is slide, meaning we are going to multiply 2 times 6, our A times our C value, and put that into the top of the X box. So 2 times 6 is equal to a positive 12. And then on the bottom, we're going to put B, which in this case is equal to a positive 7. We are then going to ask ourselves what multiplies together, what two factors or two numbers multiply together to get a positive 12 and add together to get a positive 7. So they multiply to get 12 and add to get 7. So some factors that we have for 12 would be like 2 times 6, that equals 12, but 2 plus 6 does not equal 7. 1 times 12 gives us a positive 12, but 1 plus 12 gives us 13, not 7. Another set of factors we have are 3 and 4. If I multiply 3 times 4, that gives me 12. And then if I add 3 and 4 together, that gives me 7. So I know that my factors are going to be positive 3 and positive 4. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write out my two factors. So I have currently x plus 3 and x plus 4 as my two factors. Next, we're going to do the divide. So this is the second step. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide by this number out in the very front, my A value. So I'm going to set both of these factors and divide them by that A value. I cannot simplify 3 over 2 into a whole number. So I'm just going to keep it as 3 over 2 for the moment. But I can simplify down 4 over 2 to this x plus a positive 2. Step number 3, bottoms up, is going to look at any fractions that I have. So in this case, this 3 over 2, I'm going to take this denominator and slide it up into the very front. And that's going to end up giving me two factors of 2x plus 3 and x plus 2. And at this point in time, what I can do is I can use either the FOIL method or I can use the box method and just double check to make sure that I have, whenever I multiply these together, it gets me my original equation. So quickly, 2x times x gives me 2x squared. 2x times a positive 2 gives me a positive 4x. Positive 3 times positive x gives me positive 3x. And then positive 3 plus times a positive 2 is a positive 6. I can combine these two terms together to get 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. And I see that that is my original equation. So I know that I have done this correctly. On number 2, first thing we want to do is we always check for our GCF. I didn't mention that on the first one, but we did not have a GCF that we could pull out to make this easier. On number 2, I also don't have a GCF. So my first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my A, my B, and my C values. My A value is equal to a positive 3, B is equal to a negative 4, and my C value is equal to a positive 8. So we're going to start with step 1. We're going to slide A times C. So in this case, 3 times a positive 8 gives me a positive 24 on the top. On the bottom, I'm going to have my B value. In this case, that is a negative 14. And I need to now figure out what can I do in order to find two numbers that multiply to get a positive 24 and add to get a negative 14. So before we get started on this, I want to just rewind for a hot second and talk about being able to find our factors and how we're going to know if we're going to have positive or negative factors. So there's 3 different ways that we would have this, and it's going to be based off of what we see in our top part of the x and our bottom part of the x. So in our first example, we saw that there was a positive up on the very top. This number here was positive. So if both of these end up being positive on the top and on the bottom, that tells me that my factors are going to end up being positive. For our example on like number 2, we have a positive factor on the top. We have a negative factor on the bottom. When that happens, so I have a positive number on the top and a negative number on the bottom, that tells me that my two factors are going to end up being negative numbers. And we'll see that here in just a second with number 2. The last group we have is if we have a negative number on top, and let's say we have a positive on the bottom, immediately I know if I have a negative on top, I'm going to have one positive and one negative number. But if the number is positive on the bottom, that means that the positive value or the positive factor is bigger. Similar to it, if I have a negative on the top and a negative on the bottom, okay, the negative on the top immediately tells me that I'm going to have a positive and a negative factor. If the negative is on the bottom, then that tells me that my negative factor is bigger. And we'll see some examples of that here shortly, but we can use that diagram to help kind of determine what kind of numbers we need to be looking for. So for number 2, this is one positive on the top, negative on the bottom. So that tells me that my two factors are going to end up being negative numbers, and that's going to help me figure out what kind of things can add together, two negative numbers to get me a negative 14 that can multiply to get positive 24 on the top. So I have 4 and 6. So negative 4 and negative 6 gives me a positive 24, but whenever I add that together, that gives me a negative 10, so that's not right. I could have 3 and 8. So negative 3 and negative 8 multiply to get a positive 24, but that would give me a negative 11, so that also doesn't work. A negative 2 and a negative 12 would multiply together to get a positive 24. And whenever I combine negative 2 and negative 12, that does give me a negative 14. So that tells me that those are my two factors that I'm going to work with here. So for my next step, I'm just going to write out x minus 2 and x minus 12. Step number 2, I need to divide by my a value. In this case, I'm going to divide both of these factors by 3 and see what I can simplify down. I can't simplify this x minus 2 over 3 yet, so I'm going to keep it like that. But I can simplify negative 12 over 3 to x minus 4. Step number 3, bottoms up. I'm going to take what I have in my denominator and put it into the very front. So then that's going to give me 3x minus 2 for my factor, and then x minus 4 for my other factor. We could go through and multiply that together in order to check. You are more than welcome to. For the sake of time, I am not going to. We can move on to the next one. Over here, whenever I have this b value here, there's nothing in front of it, but I do still have an a value. That's going to equal 1. But knowing that I don't have something out in the front, that tells me that there's also not a GCF. So we're going to identify our a value is 1, b value is negative 4, and c value is negative 12. So step 1, I'm going to slide positive 1 times the negative 12 is on top. And then I'm going to put my b value, which is a negative 4, in the bottom. A negative on top tells me I'm going to have a positive and a negative factor. And then I see that this is a negative 4 on the bottom, so that's telling me that my bigger factor is going to be the negative one. So 3 times 4, so positive 3, negative 4 would be equal to a negative 12. But whenever I add them, that gives me a negative 1, so that doesn't work. If I look at 6 and 2, 6 and 2 multiplied together would give me a negative 12. If the bigger number has to be a negative, that would give me a negative 6 and a positive 2. And I can see whenever I combine those together, that ends up giving me a negative 4. So positive 2 plus a negative 6 gives me a negative 4. So that tells me that my two factors are x plus 2 and x minus 6. Step number 2, I need to divide by 1 for both of these. That simplifies down cleanly, so I don't have to bring anything up to the very front. That just tells me that my two factors are x plus 2 and x minus 6. Taking a look at number 4 here, I see that there is a greatest common factor that I can pull out of a 3, a 9, a 12, a 9, and a 21. My GCF is going to be equal to 3. So then that's going to end up breaking down my standard equation into 3x squared plus 4x minus 7. And so now I can identify my A, B, and C values. A is equal to 3, B is a positive 4, C is a negative 7. For step 1, I'm going to slide 3 times a negative 7 gives me a negative 21. My B value is a positive 4. With the negative on top, that tells me I'm going to have one positive and one negative. This positive 4 down here tells me that this positive is going to be the bigger factor. I know that specifically with 21, my only factors would be 7 and 3. And with it being a positive, that tells me the bigger number 7 needs to be positive, and then I will have a negative 3 here. So negative 3 times positive 7 gives me negative 21. And then whenever I add these together, that gives me a positive 4. My factors are going to be written then as x minus 3 and x plus 7. Now for step 2, I need to divide by my A value. In this case, I'm going to divide by this 3 because this is still part of what I'm working with. I've pulled out this 3 for my GCF on the top. Negative 3 divided by 3 simplifies down to just x minus 1. And then I can do bottoms up just from right here and bring this 3 out because I know 7 over 3 doesn't simplify. So that gives me 3x plus 7. However, I want to remember that I do have this GCF out in the front, so I do need to bring that down as well whenever I am simplifying this. For number 5 here, this is my difference of squares. So we've already looked at this. Not only is this a difference of squares, but it also has a GCF. I can pull 4 out of both of those. So GCF is 4, and then I have left m squared minus 9. I can take the square root of both of these. The square root of m squared gives me m. The square root of 9 gives me 3. So that leaves me with m plus 3 and m minus 3. But then I also have to remember that I pulled a GCF of 4 out into the very front. So I didn't even have to use this in order to find my factors. For 8, 8, and 6, I can pull a 2 out for my GCF. That's going to leave me with 4x squared minus 4x minus 3. I'm going to identify my A, my B, and my C values. That would be 4, negative 4, and negative 3. For step 1, I'm going to slide 4 times negative 3 gives me a negative 12. I need to write this negative 4 for my B value on the bottom. This negative on the top tells me that one factor is negative and one factor is positive. This one on the bottom tells me my negative number is going to be the bigger factor. 3 times 4, so negative 4 times a positive 3 gives me negative 12, but it does not give me negative 4. Negative 6 and a positive 2 gives me a negative 12, and whenever I combine that, I get a negative 4. So it looks like my factors are x minus 6 and x plus 2. For step 2, we're going to now divide by our A value, which is 4. On this one here, these do not simplify into whole numbers, but they do simplify down as fractions. So instead of it being minus 6 over 4, that's going to be minus 3 over 2. Instead of having 2 over 4, that simplifies down to 1 over 2. And so my last step, bottoms up, I'm going to pull both of those out into the very front. And then I also need to remember my GCF out into the front. So my whole factored form of this one ends up being 2x minus 3 and 2x plus 1. And then my GCF is out into the front. So even if it doesn't simplify down to a whole number like either of these, you do need to remember to simplify down those fractions to the best of your ability in order to find its fully factored form. I will do a separate video working on questions 7 through 15, so you can look at those if you would like some additional help.